Good morning for those of us on the East Coast, and welcome to the Wilson Center's chat on lessons from Europe, focusing today on case studies of artificial intelligence in the public sphere. Before we begin, I just want to kind of lay the groundwork here a little bit. So why are we talking about the public sphere with a slew of European, but primarily Finnish scholars today? And that's one of the reasons is that according to Oxford Insights, Finland has been ranked one of the top 5 countries for AI readiness. And I challenge you today to think about what we can learn from these case examples that we're going to be walking through today. According to the International Trade Administration, by successfully applying AI, Finland is expected to reach a 24 billion and 8% annual boost in GDP by the year 2023, and that's a direct quote. An attribution for this growth, according to the same source, is that government support is contributing significantly to the bolstering of innovation in AI, setting regulatory incentives and funding basic research. In a speech on the social impact of digitalization in Tokyo recently, May of this year, Prime Minister of Finland, Sanna Marin, demonstrated some of the central tenets of the Finnish approach. To paraphrase, public trust in digital service is a tenet of this: equality, fairness, and social justice in digital change; human-centered design, particularly ones that make technology equitable for everyone; and an eye to the green transition. One of the common threads that we've heard from a host of different programming, co-hosted from their Science and Technology Innovation Program, as well as our Global Europe program, is that these tenets are very central to the European perspective on artificial intelligence and its applications in the public sphere. However, according to a recent report from Silo AI, one of the biggest obstacles in Finland and the rest of the world is understanding how AI can apply to support these public needs. You can invest as much as you would like in artificial intelligence, but without understanding the barriers to use, arguably you will get nowhere. Today, our speakers will walk us through several case examples from across different sectors and how AI is being used, or the potentials to be used, in Europe, as well as the risks and challenges. Audience, what I challenge you today is as we're hearing through these rich case examples, think about how government can support AI innovation to meet societal needs in an equitable, forward-looking fashion. It's not just what we need today, but what we will need tomorrow that we should be looking for. Without further ado, I'm going to pass it to our expert panel here, starting with Charlotta Collin, who is a global fellow here at the Wilson Center. Charlotta?
Thank you, thank you, Elizabeth, and good morning. I'm a global fellow at the Wilson Center, and I'm looking into emerging technologies and their relation to the public sphere and democracy, and how democracy is doing. And today we've gathered these fellow colleagues of mine to discuss artificial intelligence specifically. I feel that we have a rich discussion and a lot of ideas to bring forward to the audience today and around the world, but maybe specifically to the American audience. Looking forward to discussions. Thank you.
A really quick follow-up for you, Charlotta, is when you're thinking about this landscape, what are some of the common uses of artificial intelligence that you've seen in the public sector across Europe, especially that wanted you to drive this event, and also what makes it most unique compared to the American context?
All right. I have some ideas that I'd like to bring forward. If it's my turn to speak right now, it is. All right. Certainly. As we know, and thank you for your intro, Elizabeth, we know that at least 60 countries in the world have adopted some form of artificial intelligence policy since 2017. And regulations and programs are being developed on both sides of the Atlantic. This is actually an issue that is bringing the EU and America together, thinking of mostly actually how the government should protect its citizens from the harms of AI. And this has to do with the fact that we know of both democracies and autocracies doing a lot of work on thinking of how to employ AI in the service of their societal interests. I think, however, that we should not talk only about the harms of AI and how rogue states and autocracies misuse the power of AI. I think we should start looking at the AI as an opportunity for good. And that's why today we'd like to bring out examples from Finland, a Nordic country, as said, with a very high level of digitalization. And we have successfully employed AI in many fields, such as healthcare, transportation, state finances, and environmental sustainability. And today we're going to hear more about these examples. But I'd like to bring forward something already mentioned. The cornerstones in a society that is employing AI for good, for the good of people, is trust and good governance. And I mean trust in general, but specifically trust towards public authority. And I think the level of public trust that we have towards government in Finland is based on the fact that we are the least fragile state in the world, and we have a record low level of corruption. So these are quite sort of big questions for any country to meet. Challenges, and whether the experience of AI in Finland in its public sphere can be implemented in the US, for instance, by scaling up efforts remains really to be tested. I don't know, but I feel it is, however, worthwhile hearing us out today, because many public sectors in most countries are fighting with inefficiency and red tape. And some of these problems can be alleviated by AI, mostly in tasks where human subjective judgment is not required and data is ample. We have a wonderful example with the annual tax report, my favorite, everyone's favorite. We have to fill in the tax report in most countries, and it's cumbersome, but in Finland, it's sent to every citizen's pre-filled through an AI process of data collection from different authorities. Imagine the relief. At least I felt it this spring. So the question of privacy then, this is the big question. And in the public AI systems of Finland, this is dealt through a letter of consent and a common acceptance of the government upkeeping a certain level of cybersecurity. Actually, the government of Finland owns a company for this purpose. And opting out is always an option. Opting out from sharing your information is possible, but it might not be such a convenient decision. For instance, we have a database with all medical records from every person in one database, open to any medical personnel at that moment, which is treating you for an ailment at any clinic or hospital in the country. So whether it's public, whether it's private, they have the access to your information, as do you yourself. Now, one very important question in all of this are ethical considerations, and whether the individual is able to balance these questions. So will the subject be able to understand what he or she is going into, getting into? And this thought process is not easy, and it's not becoming any easier. And that requires really a basic level of education, a robust basic level of education. And I think that is a question of equity in all of this. And when thinking of the good of artificial intelligence in a welfare state, the idea is that it lifts the rights and protections of the citizens to the forefront. And so it's thought, this is the thought in the best of worlds, which is of course contested or challenged by autocracies and countries with problems in corruption and such. So there are risks, of course, but we do see a lot of great benefits as well. And I feel that instead of discussing AI as a source of harm, possible harm, and the risks, we should be seeing artificial intelligence as a normalized, as a natural part of public life. And that's why I urge countries around the world to think of technology as as a force for good, as a force for a better society, more equitable, and seeing this as worth harnessing, and through regulation, and sort of a social contract, which is a smart, people-centered, with a smart people-centered focus, with a regulation that makes sense to everyone. So take responsibility to see AI is not just a venture for private companies making profit for shareholders. It is that, it should be that, but it can also make profit for the taxpayer and the voter. It's not just a question of Big Brother surveillance, which it is, of course, but it is also a question of daily life now and even more so tomorrow. And we're really, really progressing at light speed. So there's a push for taking public responsibility, for harnessing AI for the public good, and pushing that issue and that responsibility to private companies such as big tech, I feel is just a temporary measure. It will turn back to the public sphere in the end. And there is an urgent need to think of democratic processes and the ways in which we can engage citizens and people into these AI processes so that we all feel safe in this space. And I'll just finish here by saying that artificial is here to stay. It's not going anywhere. It's not in the ICT department. It's with all of us, and we should just make the best of it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And so just as a point of order, we'll go around and hear from each of our speakers first. Then we'll have an open question and dialogue with our speakers before moving on to audience questions. And I want to just say thank you to everyone who sent us questions in advance. If you are not one of those people or something comes to you as the dialogue is continuing, please feel free to comment below in the chat. You'll see, if you're on the Wilson Center website, a chat box below the viewing screen that you can enter in comments and questions. Great. Thank you so much again, Charlotta, for that overview perspective. And now we're going to move to Laura Rochslalen. I'm so sorry for my poor pronunciation, but she's an associate professor at the University of Helsinki, and she'll be talking more about artificial intelligence and sustainability. So take it away, Laura.
Thank you, and very good and very early morning from the West Coast, everyone. So as said, so I will be talking about from the sustainability viewpoint. And as we all know, world is in a crisis from the sustainability development viewpoint, from all the different 3 pillars of sustainability, so the economical, social, and environmental aspects. And it has also been shown in research that artificial intelligence is one of the main enablers of getting these United Nations defined sustainable development goals. But at the moment, the development related to artificial intelligence and sustainable development is quite scattered, and it's addressing quite limited use cases. And then to be able to really get kind of like the sustainable goals achieved, we have to do something called sustainable transformation. So meaning that we have to address big systemic changes, where of course artificial intelligence can well help. And I think one of the biggest strengths of AI, in addition to being able to deal with a huge amount of very complex data, is that we are able to simulate different systemic changes without intervening with the humans and the environment. So we can test the different decisions and implementations that we would like to do and see what would be the effect, for example, for the humans and for the environment. But I said that at the moment, still kind of like the development ecosystem is quite scattered and limited, and therefore we really have to join the forces of the academia, the companies, and then of course the public authorities. And I'm also coming from the Finnish Center for Artificial Intelligence, where we have established something called virtual laboratories, where we are developing artificial intelligence methods for addressing these big societal problems together with different companies. We are developing the methodology, gathering all the scientists around a certain application area, also then collaborating with companies and public authorities. And one of the good examples of where AI can help in sustainability is the traffic. And then for the traffic, so the EU is providing really good regulations how to enable the development of the future traffic based on AI. So for example, autonomous driving and electrification of vehicles. And as was already said, that we have really good regulations protecting for example, the privacy of the citizens. So we have in EU set up this general data protection regulation, which is controlling how the data coming from users is coming and how that can be used. And of course, the data is very key enabler also for the future autonomous traffic, where the data must be shared among everyone in the ecosystem. Then also in EU, we are preparing something called AI Act that is also controlling what kind of like applications can be implemented and used using AI. So also then to protect the users in the society. And then also something quite important now opening the AI development ecosystem is something called Open Data Directive that is also then helping the businesses to act in European ecosystem. And it means that all the public authorities in EU must open the data available to be used by everyone. Then also when talking about the systemic change from the transport viewpoint. So in Finland, we have also very kind of like enabling ecosystem. So the legislation allows everyone to test the autonomous systems on the public roads. And also the government and the cities are setting up great infrastructure supporting also, for example, the development of autonomous driving. And then here are some pictures from up the North Finland, where also these quite limited and different kind of like autonomous driving cases, scenarios can be tested in very Arctic environment. But I said so the public authorities and then also the cities are really well kind of like enabling the development of artificial intelligence based implementation and development. But still what seems to be really missing from the ecosystem is kind of like how do we then get the new developments into use. So it is not very well seen that when there are new great achievements on this viewpoint, so how would those then affect, for example, the urban planning and the policy making? So we don't really yet see the plans taken in action. So for example, in Helsinki area, the capital of Finland, so still the decisions for how the urban planning should be made in the future, how the traffic should be organized, are still quite heavily based on the existing traffic systems. And if I still have a few minutes time, so I just wanted to highlight something that also bringing a bit more practical example of how AI can then help in kind of like the systemic change development from the sustainable viewpoint. So we are, for example, working with different projects where we are able then to use AI for simulating the future traffic ecosystem. So for example, addressing how the different future autonomous driving, the kind of like having in the traffic both human-driven and autonomous vehicles, and how would the electrification affect the CO2 emissions in the cities. And as said, we are now able, with using AI simulation, to test the different scenarios and then find the most optimal solution from the sustainability viewpoint. But that was my few words about the topic. Thank you.
No, if you'll give me just a second, I would love to dig into that last example a little bit. Can you talk about how the process was for you in gearing it up, especially what data was needed for the simulation itself?
Okay, yes, so thank you. So we are collaborating in, for example, this project with the city of Helsinki. So we are getting the historical data from how the traffic has been so far, and then we can use that in simulating and changing some parameters there and simulating and seeing how that would affect. So again, as said, so we are collaborating with both public authorities and then also companies in these projects and gathering the data coming from their operations.
So there's a lot of collaboration and syncing of data between not only your university, but also the government structures using their historical data sets to help inform future modeling.
Definitely, yes. And I think this is probably one of the strengths of Finland also, of being a small country, is that it's quite easy to find the collaborators and the important actors on the field and be able then to make these networks there.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Laura. I really appreciate those insights, and we'll have more questions for you a little bit later. But we'll switch now to a completely different example from Finland with Aleski Kopen. He is a special advisor of digitalization at the Ministry of Finance in Finland. And we're very excited to hear how you've applied artificial intelligence through your work.
Thanks a lot, and thanks for having me. I come from the National Artificial Intelligence Program called Aurora AI, and I'm happy to share some insights and thoughts regarding what we have been doing since, let's say, 5 or 6 years. So it has been less or more a bigger journey for us, and it's still ongoing. So we have basically just started our path regarding that sense. But first of all, as we were talking about the systemic change, this is the way we try to apply artificial intelligence, smart technologies and data for the benefit of the people. So basically, one of the key questions is that to what for we are applying technology or AI? Is it to control people, or is it to create enormous amount of markets around people? Or is it to strengthen people's well-being? So basically, we have these 3 kind of proceedings, and the last one is what we are applying here in Finland. So basically, if we talk about the person, we are considering the human centricity, as we have been heard before this, and that brings us to a different kind of paradigm, where basically we are challenging the status quo of how our service provision are done in our society. So if we put people at the center of the change, then we need to divide our society not through legislative perspective or mandates, but rather from people's perspective. And that's why we need different kind of aspects, and life event approach is something that we're applying here. And we're applying that in a cross-sectoral manner. So basically, I'm just presenting our few cases that we are building as we speak. So these Aurora AI network core components are just something that we are building for the future proactive service management, and these 4 key components enables us to do that. So in order to do that, we of course need data, but the data can be also provided anonymously. So we don't need strong authentication when we are optimizing services, or as you are going into internet nowadays, you don't need to be strongly identified in order to get websites or services there. So this goes the same with this service provision. Of course, when you are applying to some particular service, then you need be identified, but the otherwise the data is something that you are controlling. And this Aurora AI network will be activating less or more microservice ecosystem around these live events, and that enables us to make a smarter and ever optimizing service provision for the benefit of the people themselves, and considering live event approach. And after these live events, of course, we get more and more data about how people are behaving, and what kind of services really brings value to the people within different live events. And this is just this has been a concept for like last 4 years, and now we are in this year. The first version of this Aurora AI network is going up and running. And as mentioned, this is a systemic change. So nowadays, at least in Finland, we are. But yeah, well, basically, as we were building this task-oriented society, that basically means that this customer orientation is actually a challenge when we are still focusing on people through customer-centric orientation, where we see people as a customers. And actually, that is a challenge where we still are pushing people to go from door to door. Within this human centricity, we are having a different kind of, let's say, key concepts. And where we are applying artificial intelligence, for example, a shared situation analysis is something that we need to build through smarter usage of data and understanding of people's real situations. So this situation analysis actually forms the people's real pictures of who our people really are, and what kind of challenges they have, and what kind of services they require. Of course, the well-being and vitality strengthening data is something that we need enormous amount, and actually these data proceedings are something that we are not concentrating at one place. Rather, we are like applying a distributed way of utilizing data. And these viable service ecosystems are to be formed around these live events through this Aurora AI network. So as you might understand, these kind of technology usage requires enormous amounts of trust within the society, where people are trying to understand their own situation, to be empowered, to get better and better within their own lives, to help them to understand what kind of services normally people are utilizing within their situation, whatever that is. And these chatbot technologies, of course, is something that we are utilizing more and more, of course, all around the globe. And AI, of course, is implemented in these particular technologies as well. This kind of way also requires new kind of collaboration models. So these alliances will be something that we are heading as well. So basically nowadays the finances and investments goes straight to these, let's say, siloed services. In this live event approach, we try to figure out of cross-sectoral collaboration, where investments goes through these alliances straight to these live events, and different organizations needs to collaborate for the benefit of the people. So actually organizations are competing to bring better and better life quality for the people. And of course the competencies need to be strengthened as well. So this kind of systems change requires enormous amount of support for these organizations to flourish in this human-centric era. So basically those are the key issues I try to bring on the table.
Great, thank you. So as a quick follow-up, you mentioned the idea of trust, and you mentioned data collection, as well as how that data is being used in human-centric design. One of the things that we constantly grapple with is how to make consumers aware of how their data is being used, education around those components, as well as how it's being collected in that cycle that you just demonstrated. How is trust being built in the data collection and utilization process in your experience?
Well, in this case, the transparency is the only way. In Finland, basically, we share everything that we can share. So there is no barriers of entry of anybody. For example, around this Aurora AI program, we have Slack community. Anybody is free to join. There is like 1,500 people already involved. That's a huge amount regarding a country that holds just 5.5 inhabitants. So basically everything is open. We react to any issues. We also have the ethical group within our program, so they are free to challenge everything, and they are building the reports all the time. They have built like 2 or 3 different reports, and we apply those insights into this program as we speak.
Great. And just one other quick follow-up. When it comes to the data interoperability is obviously a big concern when you're constructing these mechanisms. So how have you approached data interoperability in these sorts of institutional applications? Yeah,
it's a huge challenge, and that's why you need to tackle the challenge by dividing the challenge, and the live event approach is the way we try to tackle those. So we try to combine each stakeholders around these live events, which holds those services that are valuable for the people, and through those, it's like a business case to be tackled together. So we all know that there are like endless amount of challenges regarding technical and semantical interoperability stuff. So it's not easy case to be solved. It's not just regarding legislation. It's about the quality of data, existing data, and most of all, incentives to take care that data quality increases. So and it's relevant and in real time. So it goes back to the incentives of who has the motivation to make sure that the data is available and to be used and valuable for different organizations.
Great. So it's not just the transparency, but also the stewardship of that data to make sure that it is useful and applicable across these different like silos that it's being implemented.
Yeah, and it also brings some less or more data economy around these live events, at least hopefully. Basically, there should be some sort of money going on regarding of who is actually building new value out of the data. So it's rather interesting topic as well.
Thank you, Alexi. And also, again, just a reminder, if you have questions, I am happy to be a voice for you in this conversation, so please just include them in the chat. And without further ado, we'll go to our final, but last but not least, as we say, speaker, Natalia Schock, who is a scholar here also at the Wilson Center, who will be talking more about applications and the ethics and those sorts of barriers for use there in healthcare.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you, everybody. And I would like to shift some kind of from these cases to more maybe provocative or in some sense strategic thinking about AI trust. So, and I also want to bring my perspectives and experience from medical humanities and bioethics to the discussion. So born in tech industry, AI engendered not only technological revolution, but also social and cultural. Emerged metamorphoses are driven by either excitement or fear. AI game players, state, society, and tech industry have different fears. And main concern for citizens is threat for their privacy and human rights, while for the state, cybersecurity risks and dominance, and for tech industry, overregulation and money loss. These concerns are competing, if not conflicting, and not coherent across sectors, countries, and regions. And what is the main question in this? In the evolving relationship between clashing stakeholders and AI, the trust is the key for AI evolution. But how could we breach growing concerns and get AI trusted? Big questions that are not easy to answer. Trust is a psychological mechanism to deal with uncertainty between what is known and unknown, grounded in previous experience. The level of trust in AI may not necessarily have a positive correlation with the social outcomes of its usage, since people may not realize that processes were driven by AI. And societal trust is navigated not only by universal transparency and education, but also particular historical and cultural experiences that should be carefully examined in different countries. But what are the challenges of AI developments, or maybe features? Recently, state increased its presence in AI policies, regulation, and implementation. It's growing AI involvement and intense AI state-private cooperation shapes AI outcomes and makes AI more tangible in critical social areas like health, elections, and state services. Writing national AI strategies became a standard practice around the world that led, of course, to politicization of the AI technology. The leaders of Russia, China, and the United States declared that dominance in AI will over the next decade translate into dominant national power and leadership in the global economy and security. So far, interstate dialogue about AI is framed with the rivalry, like the Cold War space race or COVID-19 vaccine race. There are three, among many others, connected tendencies that make trust even more complicated target amidst AI evolution. First, societal AI trust correlates with existing social contract. AI expands and replicates pre-existed trust and mistrust in society accordingly. Domestic societal trust cannot be taken for granted and could be challenged anytime by the pressure of international tech rivalry. The second, AI leadership prevails within the global powers rivalry domain. When state competes, it wants to win, not to be trusted. A side effect of state competition is a decreased trust in science and technology. And third, AI, like other emerging technologies, is challenged by weaponization. Likewise, biotechnology and work with viruses, it can be both offensive and defensive. And rarely addressed security concerns may diminish trust and inform conspiracy theories across societies. Do we really want to get like COVID-19 vaccine hesitancy situation around AI? Is technological skepticism the outcome we need? If answer is no, what are the ways for trust? People rely on the expert opinions, but sometimes they are diffusive and sometimes misleading, and one can easily find the proof for either fear or excitement, from AI optimism to AI Cold War, cybersecurity, and surveillance. State and tech companies offer AI ethics and regulation. Initially, AI ethics occurred in tech industry. Later, states and international entities joined them, addressing national and regional ethical policies, using pretty similar terms and frames. If values are shared, why do we need so many ethics? In 2019, scholars Luciana Floridi and Josh Coles offered, quoting, overarching framework consisting of 5 core principles for ethical AI, based on the 4 core principles commonly used in bioethics. Decision to learn from bioethical principles leads to learning from bioethical debates. Therefore, we need to see AI ethics on a broader historical scale, more interdisciplinary and multicultural. AI ethics could hardly be universal, especially considering its implementation in complex domains like healthcare. Historically, much could be learned from Nuremberg process denounced Nazis' medical crimes and its further implications on medicine and human rights across countries. Speaking on culture, I have my own example. I have spent almost 10 years in bioethics teaching in Russian medical universities. When in 2019, US bioethics celebrated its 50th anniversary, Russian history counted roughly 30 years in bioethics. Western bioethical concepts were transplanted into Russian context in late 80s, but was filled with new meanings, local practices, and policies diverged from international standards. The resulting discrepant bioethical discourses lead to serious misunderstandings. Russian bioethics is not the only case. We also have China. Interdisciplinary speaking, we can learn a lot from medical profession. American Medical Association in 2018 addressed concept augmented intelligence in health, trying to label own strong ethical identity inherited from Hippocrates. But what are the takeaway for us from all of this? AI-driven geopolitical dynamics and strategic competition challenge AI trust. Through strategic rivalry lens, social meaning of AI is neither neutral nor universally understood or utilized. We need to recalibrate our understanding of AI. Universal AI policies and AI ethics are hardly achievable, at least now, amidst growing techno-nationalism. Countries draw different conclusions from the same AI-related social evidence and have mismatched national histories and cultural aspects, limit shared trust in AI. AI systems are an essential part of shared decision-making process between citizens and state. And citizens, regardless of whether they are users of AI system or not, will be directly impacted by the decisions or suggestions that AI system provides. Without clearly determined societal or citizen agency and increased thoughtful citizen involvement, AI trust will be highly unlikely. Thank you.
Thank you, Natalia. As a follow-up, I want to go back to the point that you made. When states compete, they want to win, not to be trusted. And so I'm going to take the same question I asked Aleski and see if we can flip it a little bit. What builds mistrust in the application of artificial intelligence?
Speaking on kind of state level policies, of course, I would like to kind of highlight like how competition or how usage of information about AI policies and AI implementation in other states addressing kind of security issues may challenge the developed social trust in own countries. And that's the case for rivalry that some sort of had an implication on trust in vaccines during COVID. We saw this hesitancy movement and this kind of movement growing against science and technology trust. And so I think that perhaps sometimes we need to align national security needs to public policy needs in terms of maintaining sustainable trust development to new emerging technologies.
Great, and that's an underlying point for a lot of the ethical concerns that you also presented as far as the applications or even the innovation around artificial intelligence. So one of the things I wanted to go back to is the point that you also made around the geopolitical dynamics that inform some of these ethical regulatory processes. You mentioned, for example, that a lot of our ethics are coming from past examples in the health sector. And I just didn't know if you wanted to build on that a little bit more on how we are building these ethical regimes around artificial intelligence, or how we should be building ethics around AI.
Actually, thank you for the question. That's a great question, and it's quite complicated to answer it since I have very controversial experience addressing bioethics, as I mentioned. So my guess would be like, we shouldn't rely on the assumption that we have a common idea of what ethics is and how it should be addressed in different national states. What we saw and the reality, the evidence that came from the states kind of confirmed this. I mean, even smaller states that have no strong capacities in developing AI, and they produced AI ethics guidelines. Why? So what they want to protect or what they want to address, or maybe they are preparing for something. So that should be kind of very precisely examined with the usage of AI technologies. Maybe we need to collate data about state policies, the different approaches occurred in different regions, in different cultures, and try to kind of cope up what had happened in terms of developing different ethical perspectives on new emerging technologies, and also in medicine, because medicine has plenty of examples of how different ethical concerns were addressed in different countries and how they still influence the medical profession and clinical practice and patient experiences.
Thank you so much. And I'm going to put in a little blatant plug here. If you would like to join scholars like Natalia and Charlotta, the Wilson Center has an open fellowship program here where we host in-house scholars, both short-term and long-term. And then if you are in Finland, you also could connect with our colleagues at the Finnish American Research and Innovation Accelerator. Laura is currently representing that, based in dialing in, I should say, from California. And these are just ways to get connected with these sorts of brilliant minds who are thinking about these issues. So I'm going to shift now to more dialogue across our different panelists, pulling on some threads that we've talked about. And I want to go back to a point that Charlotta made, actually, is that a lot of countries are fighting with inefficiencies and red tape when it comes to both innovation in the AI space and the implementation of AI in the public sphere. Obviously, we have some caution signs, as Natalia brought up, but I wanted to see if anyone wanted to engage with that conversation about how we can either, what are some of the current barriers that are holding up artificial intelligence, or what are some of the ways that we've gotten past these inefficiencies, as Charlotta has mentioned. Lesky, go ahead, dive in.
Yeah, great, thanks. Well, I have just two words: old leadership. So one biggest obstacle for any country in the world is we have too old leadership and the digital literacy about what is really happening and what is really possible. That doesn't match with the thinking of how we are running our nations, and it also goes to the power. So basically, this kind of transformation challenges the status quo of the people who are sitting on top of their own power. So at least I've seen that in many cases, and we can see the organizations who are pushing that change faster and faster. They have very forward-looking leadership within their organization, and they are doing the changes. And the other organizations who are actually less or more seeing the change as some sort of an challenge for their own situation, then that is one of the biggest obstacles.
So literacy within governmental spheres as one potential obstacle. Laura, you want to dive in there?
Yeah, but I can continue with what Alexi said. So I also think that it's not only kind of like the decision makers who are lacking the AI literacy, but I would say that probably one of the biggest hinders is that also the citizens don't really kind of like know what artificial intelligence can do and what it is. So I think there are so many kind of like these scary myths around artificial intelligence that should be open, so that also kind of like the citizens would be willing to accept the implementation of the AI-based applications, and that way, of course, and then starting to affect then the decision makers. And then we have been kind of like, for example, at the Finnish Center for Artificial Intelligence, we have launched this hopefully world famous course, Elements of AI, where we are trying to kind of like teach citizens the AI literacy and kind of like trying to open these scary myths and really explaining what artificial intelligence is, that it's not something that is going to take over the world, but something that we can use for helping to get, for example, these sustainable achievements.
Natalia, you and then Charlotte.
Mm-hmm. Charlotte. So I would like to kind of continue what Laura has said, but I would like to kind of switch a bit from kind of educating people. I would be kind of, it seems that we need more clear understanding what the people's agency is in AI development and what are the limits of their agency when we are trying to establish new policies or use artificial intelligence addressing live event approach. Because to some extent, we still think about people that they need to be educated. But once they are educated, they want to kind of be involved. And what are the limits of their involvement, and what their rules of their involvements? And so I think that it's very important to understand the idea that citizens and society have its own agency in the process of AI development.
Yes, actually, that connects nicely with what I wanted to say. Outside of Wilson, I'm a university director, and in Finland, we have a very strong impetus to work on lifelong learning. And I would actually want to support Aleksi here in switching the other way around. Like, our children are digital natives, as we call them. My son knows things I don't quite grasp. And so people even up in the ages have less and less tools with which to grasp the changes. And so lifelong learning, we're trying to focus on giving all generations the ability to understand what is happening. And I feel in policymaking, the lawmakers are lax, because this is difficult to understand. And it is not yet in the public sphere as a burning political issue, but it should be, because it's the one most important tool with which we get to develop our societies in the direction that we want to go, like in sustainability. Emerging technologies are key to solving these issues. But I'll also like to come back to the citizens and the agency that Natalia spoke about. So my suggestion is really that we take a new look at deliberation in society. So how are citizens given the opportunity to express their opinions? And this, at the moment, it seems to be Twitter. That's a private company, and it's haphazard. It's not systemic, and it's not thought through by governments. I'm a political scientist by background, and I really have a problem with the fact that there is not a public discussion or a sphere in which we sort of have the opportunity to actually debate what we want together. And I think what Aleksi was presenting here, the efforts that the government of Finland is doing, they are hopeful. I mean, they seem to go in the right direction, but we do need civil society as well. And we need to find out platforms, because if I post something on Twitter, I know some people will read it, but I don't, as a citizen, know if actually my opinions are heard. So what is the structure in the digital age where people are being heard? I'm not going to write to a newspaper anymore. You know, that's not what young people do. So I feel we need to bridge the gap between generations, for one. And second, we need to get a discussion going with the public and the private sphere, and revamp the question of societal interaction and deliberation. And I'd like to say democratic deliberation as well.
Yeah, Charlotte, thank you for that, because I think it takes the issue of trust and transparency that we touched on before in a slightly different direction. It's more of, you're talking more about an interaction, and again, Natalia, you mentioned agency in the process of not only the implementation of artificial intelligence, but what leads up to that implementation, the development of the AI, the data that's being used, those sorts of things. And that ties back to literacy, but it also ties back to involvement and again, that sort of institutional trust in those processes. I was wondering if we might be able to put the ball on the ground a little bit, or like kind of walk through more of a case example and thinking through how to involve citizens in that process. And Oleski and Laura, I might look to you if there's a way that we can think through that, especially Oleski, you brought up the human-centered design, which that seems to be a really key component, is understanding and interacting with citizens through that developmental process and the implementation process.
Should I start something?
Yeah, I don't mean to pick on you first, but you had that great slide, so.
Yeah. In Aurora AI, we had like different kind of way to activate the people considering within that live event. For example, as we speak, we are concentrating on people between 13 to 16 years old in Finland. We are having the actually various different pilots, but let me tell you just two of those. So first one is going into confirmation camps. So basically it's a church proceeding at the 8th grade. Almost 80% of our people every year goes to these confirmation classes, and it holds also the confirmation camps in the summer time. and we are one of the services we are applying here is called How You Are Doing application. So basically it's some sort of a self-reflection tool of yourself. And these people are actually, there are like 500 youth involved in this process. And they are actually bringing their own feelings of how this system is doing from their perspective. And the other case is, as we are building in one city in our country called Tampere, we are applying one use case. It's a more or less transformative case where it's called nursing child. Those are kids who we have identified through cluster analysis as children who has to take responsibility from their elders because of various reasons. And now we are supporting them through a token economy. So basically we are applying social contracts or money investments for themselves to be used in different kind of services. And those people also are actually designing that way of working. So it's a design process for us.
Great, thank you. And Laura, is there anything you wanted to add there about building in the agency of people to that process?
Well, yes, please. So first of all, saying kind of like for the future autonomous traffic, for example, to be really sustainable, it has to be done in the way that kind of like it's not anymore the traditional traffic ecosystem that everyone owns their own private vehicle, but something that vehicles should be shared or then having this mobility as a service system, so that kind of like there would be different transportation modes joined by using artificial intelligence, and so that people could kind of like select a route from A to B and then use different transportation modes like flexibly. And of course, like this huge transformation to be able to happen, it really means kind of like the users want to use it and kind of like accept it. So definitely kind of like to be able to implement something like that means a very detailed dialogue with the citizens and then the developers and the policymakers. But how to enable that, it's a quite big question that I don't have an answer to.
No, that's completely understandable. I also want to give Charlotta and Natalia a chance to jump in here if they have something more to add to this thread. I'm seeing a bunch of not it. So one of the questions that has also come up is in these case examples, and Laura, I might call on your expertise here for how can AI be designed to help support a green transition? That's a big tenet of or at least the recent speech of your prime minister. So focusing on how AI can be designed to help support sustainability, how it's being implemented in the space, but also what are some of the things that are potentially holding it up. For example, you mentioned when you were talking that there was a missing piece of the ecosystem, and that was a missing piece being new developments to use. And I would love for a little bit more information on how that might be impacted, particularly environmental sustainability. That's
Okay,
two questions. I cheated. I cheated.
Yeah,
Two
and
questions.
actually quite wide question. So, if you mean kind of like how can AI help in kind of like the green transition? So, as said, so kind of like making these like less power consuming, kind of like more efficient future applications. So, for example, again talking about this the systemic changes in traffic, which is the field where I know. So, kind of like as having the autonomous vehicle being able to drive more efficiently and then being able to reduce the number of vehicles. And I think this could be done in all the different kind of like different application levels. So kind of like making AI to understand something that humans can't understand and very efficiently then process the data and get information out from that. But again, kind of like there is of course then the backside, and I think that's also discussed a lot, is that of course then the most sophisticated artificial intelligence methods, they are very power greedy. So when we are, for example, training the machine learning networks, they consume a huge amount of power. And then again, that is a very important development decision that we have to take into account when then developing the artificial intelligence based methods. So how are we able to do those so that they would be less power consuming? So I would say that these are again kind of like the technological development decisions that must be done. But did I answer now both of your questions, or did I miss some part?
I think you hit on the majority of it. I see Natalia wants to join in here.
Yeah, actually, I want to jump in with my own question to both Laura and Alexei. Can I do this? Okay. So both Laura and Alexei mentioned that they are working together. They have been working together with ethical committees or ethical groups. And I wonder, what were the main ethical concerns raised during your cooperation, and what were the biggest challenge for you to address in practice? So please share your experience.
Well, if I start, that was very great question. Maybe the biggest dilemma goes within the when we build the concept of the digital twin, where basically people are, as you know, the concept of the my data. The digital twin is basically the same idea, but it goes more deeply about who people are. And it goes to the existential questions of who am I. And as we were building the concept, that went to very critical questions, and that's why we were talking about the digital representation and avatars and stuff like that. So now we are proceeding through the anonymous proceedings, and let's see in the future how these hard my data could be involved in this sense. This is maybe the biggest issue involved, and also of course the decision making of the AI. So where can we apply actually and enable some sort of a learning machine to make some sort of a decision. Of course, if that's a strict autonomous decision, that doesn't maybe require AI. But if we are considering AI, then there arises a very interesting question about in what kind of processes we can apply AI, and that is still ongoing process.
Yeah, and if I then continue, so related to AI-based traffic, I would say that there are kind of like two important questions, and the other one is, of course, as said, so to be able to kind of like do something based on AI and traffic. So we must be able to share the data. So collect the data from all the vehicles and actors in the traffic ecosystem, and then also share that to everyone. So of course, then there is the big question about the privacy of the users, of the citizens. So what can be kind of like understood from the data that is then shared. And then the other question probably is that how can we also trust the ones who have developed the AI-based algorithms for example, for the autonomous vehicles. So what kind of like decisions that the vehicles will do in the future? So maybe these are the big ethical questions, but I'm really optimistic for these EU-based regulations, as said. So the GDPR protecting then the user privacy, and also the AI Act that is then also kind of like controlling and regulating the development of the AI-based methods for the future, applications for the future.
Great. And I think, unless there's anything else, something I would like to add.
Yeah, actually, it's just one idea. I have to say, like last 5 years, we have been very much interested about tackling the rising of the big brother society, of what are the design principles in our society to tackle beforehand, not to become as a big brother society, as technology enables to do that kind of. We all know that there are societies, big brother societies, and these kind of technologies that Aurora AI as well brings that might enable us to bring that kind of big brother society. And that's why we are implementing some sort of strategical design principles. For example, the My Data principle is very strong, where people should control their own situation and their own critical data. And the other one is that you shouldn't concentrate every data around the people in just one official. So basically, the more distributed the data, and the more you utilize people themselves as a key to combine the data, the better.
Yeah, that actually transitions, I think, into one of the questions we've gotten from the audience in the chat. And I'm going to paraphrase it a little bit because it is a longer question. But when considering state-led AI serving in these different capacities, what are the ways that it opens up to specific vulnerabilities, or what are some of the considerations that you need to have in that implementation that help it with being more a resilient structure? So Aleska, you mentioned a distributed process, not and I just wanted to know if anyone else had anything to add there.
May I jump in? So my guess would be like maybe people should be more informed how AI use their opinions and their data that they share, and maybe they have to have kind of more clear understanding how what particular policies were undermined with AI data. So to make their own judgments about was it effective, or did it meet any kind of their vulnerabilities or insecurities, or kind of cover their needs. And so then at the end, they can make a kind of judgment or decision whether they want to proceed with AI-driven decision-making in this particular area, or they need something else, or like more flexible, or I mean, maybe we need to kind of educate people and then provide them with their agency, and then try to negotiate with them in terms of, evaluating the processes and policy making and decision making processes, and also kind of pursue with the discussion on AI involvement in these processes, because I am, as a citizen, not every time know what decisions were made with AI, but I'm sure that there are plenty of decisions that were made by the states with the AI technology.
I'd like to add that we're in a juncture right now, if looking forward as a foresighter, wherein societies need to deliberately reject authoritarianism in emerging technologies. We are building the foundations of future life right now. And it takes a deliberate decision by society and policymakers, by people at large, that we reject the foul use of emerging technologies. And I would also say that when we speak about in Europe, the twin transition of digitalization, of digital transition and the green transition, that they take a lot of energy, physically, a lot of energy, a lot of funding, a lot of resources from society. But we feel there's no other option but to go this way. And I would also argue in artificial intelligence that we need to figure out the rules now, because in 5 years, everything is so embedded that the agency of a citizen is not there anymore to sort of question, is this AI or is this not? Can I opt out? Should I be involved? Because by then, in 5 years' time, everything is run by some form of AI. I mean, how many people are thinking about they're browsing the social media at the moment? It's AI that translates postings from languages to others. I notice French to English is bad, but I notice Finnish to English is good. I mean, and that's all AI. And how many people are actually thinking of that little detail? And so there's so many details in life that are AI as we speak, and the worry that I have is that we are, as I said in the beginning, progressing at light speed, yet so many people are not awake. But it's with this, even in societies that have taken the deliberate decision to transition into a digital age, which we actually did in Finland for a very long time ago, but still there are a lot of things that we struggle with, and it takes a lot of energy to go through the fundamentals. But I want to see this in a good light. If we do this job now, and we do it well, we'll be better off in the future, and we'll have a more robust society. So we need to reject corruption, reject becoming a fragile state. And that is actually a culture. Natalia spoke about culture. It's a culture. So if we speak about legal terms, this is an interesting detail. Legal traditions are also cultural. And actually international law does not differentiate between the physical world and the digital world. So if you conduct something foul, you're criminal in the digital domain, it's just as bad as doing something physically, like robbing someone in the streets. It's the same level, whether it's physical or digital. And I think that is also a reminder for us that the problems we have in our society right now, different social problems of crime or such, they're not going to go away with AI. It's just transforming into another sphere. And so we're not going to leave ourselves. Our identities are not going to change. They're not going to disappear, and our culture is not going to disappear. And actually, that's a good thing, right? We don't want to sell out, and I don't think we are selling out. But we need to be very careful now in this sort of transition period.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Laura, jump in.
Yeah. Sorry for kind of like being too eager to also take the turn. So and I also think that related to now Natalia's and Charlotte's kind of like points. So I think that one of the most important kind of like things that we should do in the society also to help kind of like the citizens take the agency is to be really careful on the public communication, how we are talking about AI, because still in the Finnish media, you very often see news about how AI is doing something. And kind of like this again creates for the citizens the feeling that AI is something independent that is doing something, when we should be emphasizing that humans have done these AI-based methods that are then doing something and helping something to be done. So kind of like now again emphasizing that AI is not an entity, so nothing independent, but just a kind of like tool that humans create and control.
Yeah, that how bias and framing happens within the process of the design of AI is something that we've interrogated in the Science and Technology Innovation Program. So how remembering those human aspects in the questions that you're asking the AI to ask or answer. So if I'm a Finnish developer, maybe I shore up the Finnish to English translation, for example, as opposed to other language bodies, as a micro example. I really appreciate that this conversation has kind of reflected some of the concerns that have come in from the audience around misuses of AI, but also, so we have the techno pessimists. How do we protect ourselves from these potential misuses? Not that it's pessimistic, it's just one way of framing it. The techno pragmatists, like, okay, there's good and bad, and how the Charlotta perspective of like how do we remember that these are informed by past historical movements and legislation and ethic guidelines and culturally situated. And then also the techno optimists, which are what are the benefits and how can I get involved in those technological innovations? What are the good that this can bring to society? We're getting a lot of different questions, so they kind of fall into these three different buckets. One of the questions I wanted to make sure to bring in from the chat was, how can AI be used to greatly increase the voice of a government program and the intended beneficiaries of that program? I'm assuming it's government. Sorry if that is not accurate. But how can this be used? I'm going to twist this a little bit. How can AI be used to amplify the voices of those who may not traditionally be involved in these public policy applications or in these different institutional applications? So Charlotte, this is something that you've mentioned quite a bit, is how do we get people involved in the process? I think this question is, how can AI be used to help develop recommendations for government using the voice of the people?
Yeah, thanks. It's a wonderful question, and actually we have case studies. Being a former government civil servant in Finland, actually we did try out kind of deliberation with citizens. So citizens were open to giving us their opinion on white papers, giving their opinion on programs, and unfortunately, that was not popular. It didn't actually work that well. And I would say my response to this is the iPhone, which seems to be very strong in the US. Of course, it's your technology. I think everyone kind of runs their life through their mobile phone, right? So in connection with your decisions that you do through your mobile phone, you might also be able to engage in giving your opinion. Somehow we need to find a way for engaging in a space which feels relevant to a person, which is embedded in your everyday life. And I began today by saying that I believe the artificial intelligence is our everyday, and it's a tool, but we're not really there yet to understand how to make it natural and effortless in a sense, because it was with our test, it was clearly too much effort for people to go to the governmental platforms to have a political engagement on white papers, on programs of the government. That didn't really strike a chord. And maybe that has to do with political agency and the huge change we have undergoing in political agency. Like political parties, I don't know that detailed about the US, but in Europe, people don't join political parties anymore. The biggest parties in our country, their membership level is in the thousands. That's nothing. And that sort of goes to tell that people don't feel that is the course to take anymore, because basically it should be in an app, and preferably in an app that there are apps that we use 15 to 20 times a day or even more. But I'm not going to a social gathering at the school in the evening, probably not. So I don't know if I'm responding to the question. It's so much a question of how we sense the change. And it's quite difficult to, from a government perspective, to get a sense of people's needs. Maybe Aleksi has some solution to these ideas.
If I continue, I don't have any solutions, but I'm just elaborating some ideas. First of all, if we consider just Finland is a very small country, 5.5 million inhabitants. We have like still enormous amount of different interest groups, not political ones, but different kind of interest groups, whatever those are. And last few governmental program, we have established a group led by our minister, Sirpa Paatero, who is like running the group of interest groups. And we don't need AI to make sure that there is like enough lobbyists to tell what kind of challenges people are having within our society. But we still can utilize AI in lots different kind of way. One way is to make, for example, this cluster analysis, what I just showed you. It's a way to make sure that as we are making decisions or planning new kind of services, before we plan anything, we should first of all drill down into our people or population or the segment that we are interested, and make sure that we are actually applying 100% of the population. And we cannot proceed without better understanding about that segment. And that is great place to apply AI and smart technologies, other technologies as well, that helps us to understand the people's real desires and understanding. And if we are enabling to see some sort of black spots, then we know what we don't know, and then we need to study more and find those people somehow.
Yeah, we call that process in my field of work an iterative design, where you are constantly testing and constantly reevaluating the technology based on new data. Or when I was in grad school, a very similar model would be the grounded theory model, where you start with a broad thesis and you constantly are refining it. It seems very much a part of the human-centered design process, where we focus on consistently getting those feedback loops embedded in order to help refine the product. It's not just like, here you go, here's artificial intelligence, have fun. There's a constant evolution of the technology. Did anybody else want to jump in there to add? Sorry, go ahead.
Just to say that all of these developments and ideas that we discussed today require that we have people who understand how to process data, analytics. We need a lot of STEM knowledge, engineering, connected with, I feel, culture. I always feel culture and arts. I'm pretty worried that we don't have enough of these people with these skills. And actually there's a global, almost a huge competition bordering to war between universities and countries in attracting talent. And it's very specific. The need of talent is very specific. And so one thing, it's very difficult to find people who are good at analyzing data and producing analysis that is useful for decision making on different levels. Because sometimes, I mean, AI is just a tool, as Laura said. It's just a tool, and it's not a thinking mind. So we need those people in between who then through maybe an iterative process produce the knowledge needed to take those decisions and go forward. And I wonder, that might be a bottleneck at this moment in most governments, that and maybe companies as well, because we are all competing for the same people with these skills, to have the confidence in the information given to actually take those decisions forward. I know from my previous life that I had one of these very, very clever guys, and it was an immense relief to me to understand that he knew what data was used and how it was collected and how it was refined, so that I could take steps forward confidently and not feel, oops, maybe my career will end with this. And that may be an issue for lawmakers, that they don't feel confident in taking these big steps forward.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of focus of this in US politics at the moment, with like the US Competitive Act and those sorts of things, not just for AI, but other STEM fields. The talent pipeline is something that we know long-term needs to be addressed, in order that workforce development needs to be addressed. And one of the things that this is emerging from the conversation is, it's not just a computer programmer who's sitting at their desk and writing in C# or C++ or whatever, that there's this whole network of different talent pools, ethicists, for example, that need to be involved, people with some background in humanities, people who have backgrounds in cultural studies and those sorts of things, law, that will help inform these technologies. So I think I want to flip it a little bit and just ask again, if there's, since you pulled on this thread, Charlotta, are there any initiatives coming out of Europe that are, or Finland specifically, or other regions that are trying to address this talent pipeline concern?
Well, we have a huge national program called the Talent Boost program, whereby Finland hopes to be able to attract, and we are attracting de facto, a lot of international talent. And for many reasons. Mostly it's because we're in many areas ahead of other countries in the digital domain that interests the young, but also, as you can see from my background, the nature, the fact that we're not crowded. We have a fairly large country with not too many people, and so there is a concerted effort to attract talent. But I'm very conscious of our competing nations in this. We're not alone, and the competition is becoming all the more fierce the further we go, and so I think all countries need to think about how to try to retain this talent, and also strengthen their own education systems, higher education and research funding, and funding innovation, and having those pockets of funding for new thinking, being brave, looking at startups, and just trying out stuff and failing, and eventually you'll find the concept that works. So we need to kind of think a lot out of the box at the moment.
Great. I think it was Aleski, then Natalia.
Yeah, just to be short, this is not a rocket science. So basically, majority of the people who are in the labor markets can build their own understanding regarding these aspects. Of course, if you are drilling down into deeper analysis, of course you need expertise in that sense. But basically, the first case is to help people to stop, to understand what is this all about, and really challenge their own thinking. So that's why I talk about the old leadership. So it's very challenging if you have been doing things like 30 years and you are a leader of some organization, and now somebody comes to you to say that now you need to be human-centric and this is the new system. So that doesn't go like that.
Actually, my idea was kind of influenced with what Charlotte has said. And I remembered the very important thing about learning languages. So while you are learning, when you learn language and you do not speak it, so you will forget it. And then the main fear that you have to overcome once you started learning is the fear to making mistakes and speak up. So once you just, kind of overcame this fear, you will become more proficient in using language. The same applies to artificial intelligence and talent development in this area. So I think that we need to think about how to create the educational environment around AI discussions, bringing up together talents from different fields and create the opportunities for them to create the common language for AI discussions in terms of how do they approach the way of speaking up about artificial intelligence, its developments and kind of challenges from early stages of their career. Once they finish education, they will be able to kind of work with the same interdisciplinary cross-boundary teams, and they will have the language and a kind of tool and approach how to address AI challenges. And so they will lose the kind of fear to speak up about artificial intelligence, because it will not be for them a kind of new foreign language that they need to approach. They will be familiar with speaking about artificial intelligence.
Okay, so if I can then continue, so I do agree very well with Charlotte that the kind of like biggest bottleneck in kind of like AI future is the difficulties in recruitment. And I guess that in being a very small country and quite distant from the other world, Finland is really experiencing some issues with that. But I would also want to kind of like give a credit for our government. So I think that in addition to kind of like providing the great infrastructure for different application domains. So for example, the Finnish government has established the means of using supercomputing facilities for all the universities and kind of like governmental organizations, which I think that is one of the good attractions for scientists to come to Finland. And also at the Finnish Center for Artificial Intelligence, we are also now building up an attractive ecosystem around AI, so gathering the great scientists and businesses and public authorities together, so kind of like building an ecosystem that would be attractive for also people to come to Finland.
Perfect. No, thank you so much, everyone. And thank you to everyone for their insights today on AI in the public sphere. We unfortunately have to wrap up here, but thank you to the audience who tuned in to watch this and your questions. Thank you for joining us at the Wilson Center. And thank you again to Laura, Charlotta, Aleski, and Natalia for all of your insights today. Hopefully this is the beginning of more conversations on AI and its use in Europe. So stay tuned. Thank you.